What does it mean to lose everything you've worked for in a matter of hours? To see your community, the one you've called home for generations, reduced to ashes? For Altadena, a historic Black neighborhood in Los Angeles, this isn't just a question, it's their devastating reality. Chapter 1. A community rooted in resilience. Altadena, a community with deep cultural roots and a legacy of perseverance, has become a stark symbol of how systemic inequality magnifies the devastation of natural disasters. In the wake of the catastrophic Eaton fire, families here are grappling with loss on an unimaginable scale. Homes, cherished heirlooms, and community landmarks have been destroyed. Yet, the deeper story is one of a system that has long failed this neighborhood, turning a natural disaster into a multi-generational crisis. Nestled at the base of California's San Gabriel Mountains, this neighborhood was built on hope and determination. During the Great Migration, Black families left the Jim Crow South, seeking freedom from violence and oppression. They dreamed of a place where they could thrive without fear. And for some, that place was Altadena. While California offered the promise of opportunity, the reality was often far harsher. Discriminatory practices like redlining and restrictive covenants barred Black families from buying homes in many areas. But Altadena was different. It became a rare haven, a place where Black families could stake their claim, build homes, and create a community. By the early 20th century, Altadena had grown into one of California's first middle-class Black neighborhoods. This was a place where culture, family, and community flourished. Families passed homes down through generations, creating a foundation of generational wealth, a rarity for Black Americans at the time. Schools, churches, and social organizations became lifelines, providing spaces where residents could gather, share resources, and celebrate their achievements. The Altadena Community Church, for example, was more than a place of worship. It stood as a symbol of the neighborhood's values, unity, faith, and mutual support. But while Altadena thrived, it wasn't immune to the systemic racism that plagued the country. Chapter 2. The hidden inequities beneath the surface. Despite its successes, Altadena was shaped by the same forces that disadvantaged so many Black communities across America. Infrastructure in the neighborhood was chronically underfunded. Local businesses often struggled to secure loans or access financial resources that were readily available to their white counterparts. These inequities made the community more vulnerable, laying the groundwork for the devastation that would come with the Eaton fire. Generational wealth, while a pillar of stability for many families, was fragile. Decades of discriminatory policies had locked Black families out of larger financial opportunities, leaving their assets tied to their homes when disaster struck. The losses were not just physical, they were cultural, historical, and deeply personal. Chapter 3. The night the flames came. On a quiet Tuesday night, many in Altadena were at home, enduring yet another power outage. The air was heavy with an eerie calm, the kind that settles before disaster strikes. Stepping outside, residents looked toward the mountains behind their homes. Within minutes, everything changed. The Eaton fire, driven by relentless winds and bone-dry conditions, tore through Altadena with terrifying speed. Flames cascaded down the hillsides, devouring homes, businesses, and everything in their path. Evacuation orders were issued, but the fire moved so quickly that families had little time to react. In those frantic moments, people fled their homes, grabbing whatever they could. What do you save? Many wondered, when everything you own is at risk? For most, the answer was simple. It wasn't material possessions. It was their families, their pets, and small, irreplaceable mementos of their lives. Chapter 4. Loss beyond measure. When the fire's smoke finally cleared, the devastation was overwhelming. Homes that had stood for generations were reduced to ash. Churches, schools, and community centers, lifelines that had sustained the neighborhood, were gone. But the impact of the Eaton fire went beyond physical destruction. It exposed the systemic inequities that had quietly eroded Altadena's stability for decades. Wealthier, predominantly white neighborhoods had resources and protections that Altadena lacked. Better fire prevention measures, robust infrastructure, and quicker access to emergency funds. Altadena, by contrast, was left to rebuild with fewer resources and greater challenges. Chapter 5. The Eaton Fire's Aftermath. When the Eaton Fire tore through Altadena, it did more than destroy property. Streets once filled with laughter and life became unrecognizable wastelands. Blackened trees stood like eerie sentinels over neighborhoods that had been vibrant hubs of connection. The fire's impact was swift and unforgiving, leaving families to flee with only the clothes on their backs, abandoning generations of memories in the process. One of the most painful losses was the Altadena Community Church, a cornerstone of the neighborhood for decades. This wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary, a gathering place for weddings, baptisms, funerals, and celebrations. Altadena's residents have described the fire as a cruel magnifying glass, exposing systemic inequities that have long been ignored. While the physical damage was catastrophic, the emotional and financial toll is just as devastating. Chapter 6. Insurance and government aid failures. The fight to rebuild Altadena is fraught with barriers that wealthier, predominantly white neighborhoods rarely face. One of the most immediate challenges has been insurance, or the lack of it. Many residents expected their insurance policies to act as a lifeline after the fire, only to discover denial letters or payouts that were shockingly low. This isn't just bad luck, it's the legacy of redlining, a discriminatory practice that for decades marked Black neighborhoods as high risk, effectively locking them out of comprehensive insurance policies. As a result, families in Altadena often couldn't afford the steep premiums required for wildfire coverage or ended up with policies riddled with loopholes that insurers could exploit. Those without insurance face an even grimmer reality. Rebuilding is a financial impossibility. Some families, already grappling with generational wealth gaps, are being forced to leave the only home they've ever known. Government aid, which should serve as a safety net, has fallen short for Altadena. Relief programs distribute resources based on property values, a metric that inherently disadvantages historic Black neighborhoods. While homes in Altadena may be appraised lower than those in wealthier areas, their cultural and historical significance is immeasurable. Yet the system doesn't account for this, leaving families with insufficient aid to cover even the basics. The bureaucratic nature of these programs adds insult to injury. Residents must navigate mountains of paperwork, tight deadlines, and complex requirements, all while grappling with the trauma of losing their homes. For elderly residents and those without access to reliable internet or transportation, these hurdles feel insurmountable. Chapter 7. Systemic Neglect. Altadena's vulnerability to the Eaton Fire wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of systemic neglect. Historically, Black neighborhoods like this one have faced decades of underfunding when it comes to infrastructure and public services. Outdated electrical grids, which may have contributed to sparking the fire, are a glaring example of this neglect. Roads and utilities in Altadena were already in disrepair before the fire, and now the lack of investment has become a significant obstacle to recovery. Damaged roads have slowed construction efforts, and unreliable water and electricity continue to delay rebuilding. Compare this to wealthier neighborhoods nearby, where modern infrastructure and well-funded emergency services played a critical role in minimizing damage. The contrast is a painful reminder of how deeply inequality is embedded in disaster preparedness and response. Chapter 8. The Emotional Toll of Losing a Home. The Eaton Fire scattered this tightly knit community, forcing families into temporary shelters or distant housing. Children have been separated from their schools and friends. Elderly residents, who had spent their entire lives in Altadena, now face the daunting task of starting over in unfamiliar places. Temporary housing may provide a roof, but it can't replace the sense of stability and connection that Altadena offered. For a community built on shared history and mutual support, this displacement feels like an unraveling of their collective identity. Chapter 9. Grassroots resilience. Despite these immense challenges, Altadena's residents are proving that their resilience runs deep. With limited institutional support, the community has taken recovery into its own hands. Grassroots fundraising efforts have become lifelines, raising money to help families rebuild. Crowdfunding campaigns have garnered widespread support, allowing some to begin restoring their homes. Advocacy groups are also stepping up, pushing for equitable disaster relief policies and insurance reform to ensure Altadena's recovery isn't just a temporary fix, but a long-term solution. Plans are already underway to rebuild the Altadena Community Church, which residents see as a symbol of their collective strength. This isn't just about reconstructing a building, it's about restoring a sense of hope and unity. At the same time, the community is reimagining what a more resilient Altadena could look like. Many are advocating for sustainable rebuilding practices, incorporating fire-resistant materials and updated infrastructure to prevent future disasters. Chapter 10. The Fight for Equity. The systemic inequities that have shaped this community's struggle to recover are mirrored in Black neighborhoods across the country. If we want to protect these communities, we need systemic change. Disaster relief policies must be reformed to prioritize equity. Programs that base aid on property values only deepen existing inequalities, leaving historically marginalized communities to fend for themselves. Federal and state agencies need to ensure that resources are distributed fairly, with an emphasis on supporting those who have been underserved for generations. Insurance reform is another critical area. Companies must be held accountable for discriminatory practices that disproportionately affect Black homeowners. Transparency, fair pricing, and comprehensive coverage should be non-negotiable standards. But addressing these systemic failures isn't just about responding to disasters, it's about preventing them. Increased investment in wildfire prevention measures, like fire breaks, community education programs, and infrastructure upgrades, can reduce the risk of future catastrophes. Altadena also deserves recognition for its cultural and historical significance. Funding for the preservation of landmarks and initiatives to document the community's rich history is essential. Chapter 11. Why Altadena's Fight Matters. Altadena's struggle to rebuild is about more than one neighborhood. It's a microcosm of the larger fight for racial and economic justice in America. Protecting communities like this one means addressing the systemic inequities that make Black neighborhoods more vulnerable to disasters and less able to recover from them. But Altadena's story is also one of hope. The determination and resilience of its residents offer a powerful reminder of what's possible when communities come together to demand change. Their fight is a blueprint for how we can create a more equitable and inclusive future, one where no community is left behind. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Let's make sure Altadena's fight isn't forgotten. And if you want to stay updated on more stories like this one, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.